I can tell you for 100% certainty in my mind that the Book of Mormon is not true. Historically, theologically, and it has quite the motivations behind it. Seemingly political, authoritative, and financial. Let's talk about it, because I'm sure already there are people that have their pots are stirring, whether they are upset. And that is totally cool. I'm not here to run your faith through the trash. I'm here to simply talk history. First of all, let's talk about the evidence. Now, I don't really want to point to the dumb stuff like horses, chariots, wheat, and steelwork. Although, yes, the Book of Mormon does say that those existed in 600 BCE, and there's zero evidence to support any of that. But that's cool. We'll let that one slide. The main one I want to focus on is these giant civilizations, massive cities, population size, and the battles within the Book of Mormon would have been some of the biggest in all of history, especially for that time. And it's kind of funny that we have zero archaeological evidence to support any of that. We have quite a bit of archaeological evidence to support many other battles throughout history, some even a bit older. How come these are some of the biggest and there is like zero trace of them ever happening at all? Just a little strange. There is a huge language issue, in my opinion, as well as the gross representation of Native American people, stating that Native Americans are Israelites and Amalekites that came, I think I'm saying it wrong, it's not Amalekites, Jaredites? It's been a minute. But these people came from Egypt and Jerusalem to the Americas in the hopes of search of the Promised Land. Now, the reality is there is zero DNA evidence to support that Native American people stem from Israelites. Not only is there zero DNA evidence of that, there is zero language evidence that promotes that any of their language, and I mean any of them, any of the Native American tongue, comes from Hebrew or Egyptian. That just simply is not the case. In fact, we can point to English's roots of being Latin and Hebrew, but we have zero evidence to support that that's the same with Native American culture. In fact, we have more evidence to support Eastern Chinese, DNA-wise. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense historically. And these are some inconsistencies that I see pretty constantly. Especially, this is extraordinarily strange because he uses the word Christian supposedly before Christ's death ever happened. The Book of Mormon is riddled with these kind of fallacies, as well as the fact that he uses biblical style phrasing way before the King James Version ever existed. He uses the same phrasing within the King James Version way before that book ever existed. There's no way that those people of that time were speaking in those phrases. Now let's talk about the King James Version of the Bible for a little bit, because that was one of my main questions. Why the King James Version? While I used to think that it was the holiest version of the Bible because it was the earliest English translation, my opinions have changed quite a bit since I have been agnostic. First of all, the King James Version of the Bible has legitimate evidence of fallacies or things placed into the Bible for the political motivation. For instance, King James directing his translators to keep authoritative language, using the word church instead of, they just wanted more authoritative language to support this idea that authority was a promoted thing within the Bible, when it really was not. In fact, God very much does not promote the authority over another person, oppression, or anything like that. It is considered a tool that might have to be used, but it is never supported. And I think that this is a very fair thing to change, because King James was terrified of people revolting against his rule. And that is totally fair. I think I would have too. Now let's talk about Joseph Smith himself. Well, actually, let's hold on for a second, because why would ancient American records use a 1611 English translation, including the filter of unique words to the King James Version of the Bible? Why is this book that is supposedly from over 600 BCE using phrases from the King James Version of the Bible that were really not used very commonly at all up until that point? I find that to be extraordinarily fascinating. Now let's move on to the man, Joseph Smith himself. Now, I'm not going to sit here and just bash his polygamy and stuff like that, because people have done that on the internet since the internet existed. But what I will do is talk about the fact that A, Joseph Smith was very known for telling fallible stories, specifically to his mom and the people to entertain them, as well as he was known as a fraud. He was arrested in 1826 for fraud, and it was related to money digging. This seems to be a very interesting thing for a guy that became the prophet of God by finding and digging up gold plates. This seems very, very strange to me. Now, I'm not saying and sitting here and saying that he is a fraud for sure, but he was certainly arrested for forgery, as well as he was 100% known for telling stories of ancient people simply to entertain his mother and people within his community, way before the gold plates. Secondly, let's talk about the huge discrepancy that people talk about, but I don't think they drive home quite enough, which is these two witness accounts, one being 1832 and the other being 1838. The 1832 account, Joseph Smith walked into this place, I always forget what it's called, and begged God for forgiveness for the things that he had done, as well as he was begging mostly for forgiveness, and who God appeared to him, just God, and they tell him this, where the gold plates are located, and that all of the churches aren't true, and all of that, right? Now, in the 1838 account, Joseph Smith goes to this place not to beg for forgiveness, but because he was questioning every church. He said that he didn't believe that any church was true, and he felt lost, so he prayed to God. Now then what happened was two personages appeared, one the Father, and the other Jesus, the Son. Now this is a very strange discrepancy, especially when you consider that this account has to have been the most incredible thing of this man's life, right? If I saw God, I would make sure I remember what he said pretty well, I think. It would be quite an important part of my life at that point, right? And a lot of people use the term that this 1838 account was the formal account where he truly expressed any sort of misconceptions around his account. But that is simply false. The 1832 account is just as formal. It's written down, and he uses it very voraciously. He is confident in what he is saying. Now, again, I'm not going to talk really much on polygamy or the secrecy of the church because everybody knows it. All I got to say is do your own research on that one. I'll probably have some links in the description below. I'm kind of bored of talking about that. Or go watch some of my old videos. Super, again, stuff people have been talking about on the internet since it was born. Now let's talk about the translation claims, because he presents himself as this ancient translator of the ancient language, and he also presents this idea that he found these gold plates with the ancient language on it, and that he's translating from those plates. Now, I notice how I said presented the idea, because this is not what happened. Now, this is kind of what I was taught as a kid. I mean, they definitely talked a little bit about the seer stone, but as an LDS member, when I was a child, they very much promoted this idea of gold plates and that he was translating the language from them. But that is simply not true. The real account is that he put a stone in a hat, and I'm not joking about this. He put a stone in a hat, put the hat up to his face, covered it with his hand, covered the light with his hands, so that it was pitch black, and then he saw an image appear, an image that looked like parchment paper, and writing appearing on that parchment paper. Now, I'm not going to sit here and just judge how strange that is, because, we've seen a lot of strange things happen from a lot of different religions, but it just is interesting that you're not very proud of it, clearly, right? You kind of do everything to promote this idea that that was not the case, at least to new members, and then you slowly enter this idea of, oh, well, he saw the gold plates and kept them hidden and then stuck his head in the hat. Very, very interesting stuff. Now, again, I want to drive home this idea that A, a lot of the language used in the Book of Mormon is very King James language, right? It came to pass, stuff like that. Now, this is strange for a book that was supposedly being documented around 600 BCE. Over 2,000 years before the King James Version of the Bible was ever made. Seems extremely strange to me, especially because that was not common way of people for people to speak back then. It was not, and it came to pass, and that type of biblical language didn't really exist up until the 17th century. So I find that to be a very strange inconsistency. Now, I know there's going to be a bunch of apologists in my comments, and maybe not a bunch, I'm pretty small. I hope there's a bunch of apologists in my comments. I actually love and respect all of you guys, and I think you guys are really cool, and I'd love to have a conversation with one of you. But the first thing I want to point out is absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. You cannot take the absence of the fact that there's no proof that it's false, because that's an improvable fallacy. Yeah, just in the same way I can't prove that God is false, that doesn't mean that there is no evidence to support your claim, and you're the one making a claim. You're the one telling me that this is true and that I should read it, and this is a historical document that Joseph Smith has translated. You are the one that needs to come up with the evidence. We, as agnostic people, have, trust me, tried to find this evidence, and honestly, everything archaeologically and historically points to the fact that this is totally inaccurate. Second of all, the gross representation of the Native American people being mostly their language. Native Americans' language do not stem at all from Hebrewic or Egyptian language, so there's just no real way for that to be the case in my mind, as well as the DNA evidence 100% doesn't support the idea that these are Israelites. Now, hearing and understanding what I've just read to you guys and what I've talked about, this shouldn't be seen as an attack, although I am 100% confident that the LDS viewer base of this video are probably going to feel like this is an attack on them. So let me frame it like this. I actually love your guys' theology. I think it's very beautiful. I think your idea of what the afterlife is also very beautiful. But I am telling you for 100% fact that historically and archaeologically, the Book of Mormon is not true. That is not an attack on your people. That is me stating literal evidence to support my claim. I would like to see evidence to support your claim. This is not an end-all be-all. This is not the answer. I am presenting evidence to support my claim. This is how discussions work. Now I would like to see some of you guys link stuff in the description or in the comments or whatever. Show me the evidence that supports that the Book of Mormon is true. Show me the evidence that supports that Joseph Smith is genuinely a prophet. Because I have seen remotely none. And I have read the Joseph Smith letters. I have been reading the Book of Mormon. I've read the King James Version of the Bible, which is way politically motivated and factually known to be changed to continue authority over another individual. King James wanted to make sure that his authority wouldn't be undermined by the Bible, so he insisted on the changing of some language to make it seem much more authority-friendly. I find this to be disturbing, especially when I see that why the LDS Church uses the King James Version of the Bible. Again, the presumption is that it is the most holy version because it is the first English translation. But it is clearly the most politically motivated and one of the most changed, specifically when it comes to women's role within the church, talking about the wives of deacons rather than their wives, insinuating that maybe deacons could be women. Previously and after the King James Version of the Bible, that is just certainly not the case. Now, this is, again, very fun stuff. I'm just here to have fun and to support my claim. I would like to see your claim supported. This is not an attack on anybody. This is supposed to be a respectful video. I'm not here to slander the people. I am very pro, let's talk about the ideas, not the people. And I think that's an apologist claim already. So, yeah, let's talk about the ideas and let's not talk about the people. I don't really care about Joseph Smith's sketchy history, although it should be used as a little bit of emphasis at the least, especially because it is accurate. I want to talk about the historical inaccuracies, the political motivations behind the Book of Mormon, and stuff like that. I far less care about whether or not God's real, and I far less care about whether or not Joseph Smith was a piece of shit. I think my opinion is pretty clear on that, especially if we look at the Joseph Smith letters or you read them personally, and afterwards go and read the Doctrine and Covenants. It is quite eye-opening. But I'm not going to sit here and use that as a way for my claim to be more valid, because it's simply not the case. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Have a good rest of your day. It's been an incredible journey learning about all these different churches and religions. Love you. Bye.